get involved politically for those who can vote and for those who can't vote yet?
All right. The very first thing is it's important to remember that in the history of civil rights, that it was students who led much of the focus and the energy. If you think back on SNCC, the um, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, their work in DC, their work founded in 1969. I wanted to make sure that I didn't get my date wrong. Youth-led nonviolent direct action campaigns against segregation and other forms of racism. And the members played an incredible role in the sit-ins and with the Freedom Riders, the 1963 March on Washington, and voter education projects such as the Mississippi Freedom Summer. Those were students who organized. Those are students who had a presence of mind that not everybody lives the so-called American dream. And we're committed to ensure that more and more, if not all, Americans have that opportunity to live out their potential, regardless of their race or their gender or anything else. That simply being an American mattered. And that came from students. And I'll tell you, even these last 2 years, we just created last year a youth council that, it had eight students this last fall. We want to have it so that there are 25 of them, which reflect the council districts, there are 25 council districts, because we realize that they have a different perspective than we do. And their experience is far different than ours, as we're growing older. We're looking for students. We're looking for the young minds, because we know that they've got answers that we'll never be able to understand or never be able to contemplate. The role of the student is essential in progress, not just today, not just 58 years ago. It's always been important. And just know that you have a role, and we want to honor that role. You just need to have the will and the want to step into that role.
Thank you so much. So the part you were saying about that student council that you all just put together of, I believe, 25?
It was 8 this first cohort, but
eight.
we'll be going to 25.
Okay. So my next question, just coming off of that, after seeing the recent protests and even January 6th, like the anniversary of January 6th and what happened last year, did any discussions in the city council change because of those events?
Without question. One of the largest changes that we made was based on an incident. I believe it was maybe May 30th. It was a Sunday, and 2 young protesters at the corner of Pennsylvania and Washington were batoned. And although we didn't see all the video, what we did see was non-resistance. So the question came up, why are we batoning young ladies, 2 young ladies, whose arms are by their sides? Why is that okay? And so we were told that it's policy. And I was told by one individual that because the lady's hands, although they were vertical, were in balled fists. And if you've ever gotten beaten by a parent or a teacher, and by the way, I'll just say, when I went to school in Nigeria, I did get beat, so I know what the response is. I just want to put it out there. You are rigid, and everything goes rigid, and you do ball your fists. Well, the balled fists were supposedly a concern, and it seemed that it was okay to baton them. What we did, because of what we heard from demonstrators and protesters, was we created something that brought us a lot of headwind. But it was called the General Orders Board. which is where policy is formed. And up until that time, and it's still a controversial discussion, up until that time, policy, police policy, was done and created by law enforcement without any civilian input. And that we realized is a concern, because until you can hear from the people that these laws are going to impact, we're not actually working in the spirit, I think, upon which this country was founded. And so we created something called the General Orders Board, which is majority civilian, who can then work through what policies will remain, what new policies come forward, just what are those policies. That was a result, an example of a result, that we heard and we decided we will do something about this because we've heard and because we know that our community members have spoken and found it disturbing. And that's our role as representatives.
Thank you. My next question is, as president of the city council, what does your job entail? What is your vision for the city council or in Indiana or Indianapolis in general?
That is a loaded question. It is loaded. It entails having a vision and making sure that the vision reflects the will of our constituents. And more, our job has been greater outreach, greater participation of our community members. Here's an example. Every 10 years, there's a census, the decennial census. And every 10 years, the Congress and state representatives and state senators, members of councils, have to redraw their district boundaries based on census, census feedback, census data. Population shift, communities of interest, may shift. It is now on us and the council this season to redraw the district boundaries for the council districts in Marion County. And what we've done is, we believe it is the most transparent and the most engaged process. It's been designed to be this way. We want to have open forums on our district boundaries. Typically, you might see across the country that those individuals who are in leadership draw their own boundaries. And oftentimes they draw them to preserve their own power. Does this sound familiar? I didn't hear you. Does this sound familiar?
Yes.
So what we want to do is change that so that we get more citizen participation in the outcomes of those boundaries. What are the common, what are those communities of interest? What are the things that are important to our citizens? And we're going to do this in open forums, one in every single township, over the next 2 months. This is the kind of thing that is a vision for our council. How can we be more deliberate in getting community feedback so that we know how to do our job better? And in fact, one other thing, sorry, this may sound boring, but I'll just tell you. Because of the American Rescue Plan dollars that the city of Indianapolis received last year, it was $419 million. A lot of that goes into community safety. What are we doing to know better where to apply those dollars than to go to community members who know their own particular communities better than anyone else, better than any one of the 25 of the counselors? We want to get that input and then make decisions from what we've been told versus imposing from the top down, we're going to fund this particular program or this particular initiative. That's where I think this is what we have learned and what we are continuing to learn, that we've got to get our citizenry engaged, one, and involved so that we can hear what's best and what they believe is best. Because our constituents know their districts, their areas far better than we ever will. Just like every one of you knows his or her family member better than I ever will. Yes? So in the same manner, if we scale that up, a neighborhood knows its own challenges far better than we will. And part of this has come from 2 years ago. And the third element, if you don't mind, even before COVID hit, or before George Floyd was murdered, we started 2 years ago this month a declaration that the work that we were going to do was going to have as a foundation a response and a sensitivity to race and to equity. And our role in government, as you ask, is to set a vision for our city. And part of that vision is we've done things a certain way for decades and for generations. And yet we still have these great, wide chasms of inequity. Our role is to address those head on, like that buffalo, I believe, that you just talked about. And make us all accountable. And so now every year, that every agency which gets funding comes before the council, and they have a series of questions that they must answer related to their staff, related to the products they buy, related to the salaries of their staff, the positions of their staff. Do we have an equitable distribution? Are we looking at our spending in an equitable manner? So why we've used a particular firm now to supply us, I don't know, printing paper. Okay, have we ever looked at anyone else? Have we actually been intentional about looking for other opportunities for other entities, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, folks who have disabilities who own businesses? Are we being conscious of that? And are we providing the opportunity for as many people to be successful in this city as possible? Or do we do what we've always done, which will end up being the same results that we've always had? And so when you ask what do we do, or what in our local government, is to ask ourselves those questions. Are we going to make a difference? And is it going to impact through our communities so that everyone wakes up with a sense of dignity and hope for that day, not just for themselves, but for their families?
Thank you. I really love that answer. It's a great answer. My final question is, how can non-Black people live out the dream MLK had? How can they be better allies?
So not being non-Black, I had to ask someone who was non-Black. Because I don't want to assume nothing. I'm telling you all, don't assume anything. Don't think you know everything. So I had to go do my own research. And I got back some interesting answers, actually. One was, don't ever assume that you're woke. Because as soon as you assume that you're woke, it is proof positive that you're not. And the other is, listen first before speaking. Hear the other perspectives so that you want to give respect and honor to those others, but so that you can actually hear someone else's perspective, not just your own. If you don't mind, I had to write these down because, I'll just tell you now, I want to listen, I want to hear, I don't want to assume nothing. Another was make a conscious choice to walk in another person's shoes. It is a choice. Just like a moment ago when I was talking about living in Nigeria or being in Nigeria, that I don't ever think about myself as a Black man. I just am. Does that make sense? It's like when you're at home, you don't think about, I'm the son of this man and that woman. You just are, right? Those are your parents. That's a fact of life. Well, it is a conscious choice when you're not in your own environment to be looking It's a conscious choice to be looking out for someone else. That when they're in your environment, how are they adapting to it? How are they responding to it? When your friends come over to your house, I don't think they call your mom and dad, do they? Do they? Because if so, y'all need to be asking some questions. I just want to keep that part real. Just keep that in the back pocket. They're not at home, they're at your home. And your job as a host, as a friend, is to make sure they feel comfortable, right? So they come back. In the same way, even here in school, on your sports teams or in your debate clubs or whatever else, if you know that someone who is with you, part of your team, is not part of the majority in a sense, have the consciousness to put yourself in their shoes to make sure that they are okay. And then to be willing to listen to make sure that everyone else thinks or is sensitive, to make sure that, are we part of a team or are we a team and then we got this other person up in here? Does that make sense? Because from that other person's perspective, they're not at home. Just like when your friends come by to visit, they're not in their own home. It's a form of grace and respect for the human dignity and the human experience of someone else. So it's a conscious choice, and one that I would ask all of us to try, even if you got to put it on your screensaver, about remembering someone else's experience. I think it will help.
Thank you so much. That concludes all my questions. Let's give President Osley a round of applause.
Thank you guys for that discussion. That was an amazing discussion. Now introducing Layla for our speaker.
Hi, I'm Layla Kiwanuka, and I'm a junior here currently at Brebeuf. This past summer, I was fortunate enough to have the chance to learn more of Black history other than surface level things like slavery, the transatlantic trade, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and Ruby Bridges. Have you ever thought about that? There are so many topics that can be learned, but schools ask to cut it short in order to give students the full American history. I just think that while all of these things I mentioned are nice to know and acknowledge, I just want to say that there is so much more that can be learned and gained. So over the summer, I signed up to, oh, sorry, over the summer, I signed up for a trip that is offered by that was offered by the University of Evansville in Evansville, Indiana. It was called Journey to Justice. It helped me and all of the others on my trip to truly understand the past of African Americans in this country. We learned about the multitude of businesses and churches that aided during the Montgomery boycott. So it wasn't just Rosa Parks in this movement as it is often portrayed. We also learned about the different white people at the time that used their positions for good, some with power and some with no. Um, And we went to various as well as influential parks and museums. For example, the Kelly Ingram Park, the Equal Justice Initiative, or EJI, or the 16th Baptist Church, the Legacy Museum, and the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, or BCRI, to name a few. Now, some of these places may sound familiar and some may not, but the question is, are you willing to take the initiative to further educate yourself in this history? After returning home from the trip, I felt as though that I had a better understanding of the life and past here of Americans or here of African Americans in America. Although I had a better understanding, I knew that this wasn't the end all be all, and there was still so much more for me to learn. Now, I want to make clear that despite my outer appearance, I am African American and not necessarily Black. Both of my parents were born to people that came directly from Uganda, an eastern country in Africa on the equator, and my mom was born in Uganda before emigrating to the United States as a kid. So the generational stories and knowledge passed down to Black Americans here in the US aren't necessarily passed down in my family. As I continued to grow older, I became more and more aware of how oblivious I was to the history of Black Americans here in America. There are so many things I could talk about, but I think the things that resonated with me the most from this trip was learning about the mass incarceration rate, the mass lynchings, and just the prejudice that began since African Americans were brought here. The one that hit me the most was the mass incarceration rate. When we went to the Equal Justice Initiative Museum, or the EJI learned that one in every three Black men will have been in prison at least once in their lifetime. Now that data is a little outdated by a few years, but it isn't off by much. After learning that African Americans are roughly 4 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana than their white counterparts, it enforced my belief that we need to work harder to improve the systemic racism in this country. By saying work harder, I mean I feel as though that there's more that can be done to bring awareness to the fact that systemic racism is a thing. A few acts of performative activism aren't good enough. The We Stand With You movement, and most specifically the Black Square post, can be helpful, but it can also be harmful. Advocating for Black lives became more popular during the pandemic, specifically quarantine, as well as after the death of George Floyd. My only concern is, are people still advocating today, or was it really just a phase? I want to know that my Blackness will always be protected and valued. I don't want it to just be a fleeting moment because it's trendy to post a square, giving the sense that you care about the movement. To me, I feel as though that if you are just posting to be cool or considered trendy, then you shouldn't be posting at all. I understand that posting a Black square was something that everyone could participate in, but if there was no meaning behind it and you just posted because everyone else did, then you aren't helping the cause as much as you believe you are. The meaning behind it becomes empty if you are posting it just because everyone else did. When you posted the Black square, did you believe that you felt that you did all that you could? Before you posted the Black square, did you also take the consideration to actually look into why it became a thing or it became a trend? Now, your answers may vary, and I'm certainly not saying that there is one right and there is one wrong. In my opinion, I feel as though that there is always more that can be done. Posting a square is not the end all be all. There are so many businesses that you can support, marches that you can participate in, or books that can be read to help educate yourself and others. It is all a matter of finding out where and how to begin these acts. Doing research is key, and as Martin Luther King states, human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. Now, the suffering and struggle are a little different and not as applicable to today, but it is up to us to take the initiative to aim at improving the injustice and making this country a better place to live, not just for a specific group of people, but for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Layla, for that. That was amazing. I want to give one final thanks to everyone who helped make this convocation possible. My amazing co-chair, Kennedy Hogue, Ms. Storrs, Mr. Pettigrew, Mr. Van Slambrook, and the crew who made this run as smoothly as it could while streaming. And now we welcome back Mr. Van Slambrook.
Good morning, everyone. Just want to wrap before the discussion in the classes, the program here, with a huge thanks on behalf of the whole school. I'm grateful, very grateful as principal for the opportunity for our students to learn from these messages today from each of you. I'm grateful for Jaden and Layla for putting yourselves out there and being vulnerable and open and sharing about yourselves with us. You did a great job. Thank you both. Grateful for Mr. Osley in our community and for your messages to us today. I think we can learn a lot, and just grateful for you. Thank you so much. So I think an important reflection for our community, important day for our community to reflect on the messages you heard today, and that's what I'm going to ask you all to do in the classrooms at this time. We've got about 10 minutes. 10:45 is when the convocation ends. It might be a little bit less than that. So you just have a little bit of time for teachers to work with those students on those discussion questions before that 10:45 bell rings. And then we have a 10-minute period before the period 7 starts at 10:55. So at this point, we're going to wrap the stream to the classrooms, and we have those discussion questions that teachers have. Yes, that's what's happening, right? I'm making sure I got that right. So teachers, please work on those with your students. Go through those together for the last part you have here in class. And here in the chapel, we can kind of talk amongst ourselves. Ms. Storrs, as mentioned, kind of turn to your neighbors, get to know each other a little bit. Should we repeat the questions? We're going to have them put up here. We'll put the questions out there for you here in the chapel, as well as for all you in the classroom. So once again, thanks so much on behalf of Rough Jesuit. Thanks for BSU and everybody who's involved. Thank you.
So yes, the formal address and aspect of the convocation has concluded, now transitioning into a more discussion-based portion for the next 5 to 7 minutes or so. In your kind of spaces where you were at, I'd say pods of, I don't know, 5 to 6. We do have 3 discussion questions. Do I need to repeat our discussion questions for the audience? Some say yes, some say no. We're going to go. And JD, is it possible to get them back up here? Do you know? No? On the slide up here? I'm sorry? Okay, no worries. So, reflecting on Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream for the future of our nation, how would he feel about the current state of our country?